Bill to the House.
Mr. Speaker.
I call the honourable member Jacinda Ardern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I listened with interest to the last speaker before he resumed his seat, and he talked about his concerns about throwing money at the arts before he embarked upon what was a very poetic statement. I wasn't entirely sure how it fitted in, but I'm sure that quote is going to stay in my mind for years beyond any actual use. But thank you for sharing it with us. But concerns about throwing money at the arts, I think those concerns seem to be quite misguided, Mr. Speaker. When Labor came into government, an $80 million investment package was put into the arts off the back of what could only have been described at that time as a severe state of decline. The arts needed not just a boost, but a recovery package to deal with that significant neglect at that time. And they may describe that as throwing money at an issue, but it seems that actually whenever Labor talks about anything to do with investment or bolstering particular programs or any alternate vision to the National Party, it's described as throwing money at something. Oh, but $1 billion tax cut? Oh, $1 billion tax cut? No, that's not throwing money at something. It's not a bribe. That's just good, sound political policy making, isn't it? So you can see that there is an absolute distinction in the National Party's thinking on some of these issues, an unfair distinction as well, Mr. Speaker. But coming back to the bill specifically, because we are debating today the final stage of the Arts Council bill, and all through this bill, Mr. Speaker, we've consistently made the point that it's not entirely clear what has driven the Minister to go through what is always a very lengthy process to get the point where you debate through the full stages of the House, a structural change like this when it requires primary legislation. It's never been entirely clear what vision the Minister had via this bill. Indeed, it's never been entirely clear to me what his vision for the arts is generally. Now, I will concede this one point, Mr. Speaker. There are many other ministers in the National Cabinet who could have come into the arts portfolio and absolutely gutted it. They could have. They could have come in and really just hunkered down, stripped out funding from all sorts of sectors and really put us on a backwards path. Chris Finlayson, to give him his dues, has not hollowed out the arts portfolio in that regard. But I don't believe that we have seen the arts advance under his leadership. It's been very, very clear that there are certain aspects of his portfolio that he enjoys, that he is quite happy to support and bolster, and others which he is quite content to neglect entirely. Now, I would say it's almost as bad as actually taking a vicious campaign against a particular sector as it is to just neglect it and let it fade, but not give them any rallying point, because everything just looks like it's the status quo while there is a subtle decline. And that is the kind of behaviour that means that Labor then has to come in and try and rejuvenate a sector. So what this bill does really is just consolidate the council. That's all it really does. It is not a visionary piece of legislation, despite the fact that it's been a very onerous process. And in fact, for many communities, it sets back the representation that they have had to date under the status quo. Now, why has the Minister chosen to do that? Well, I would contend that it's because he has issued a jihad on committees. You know, we already know that this is a minister who has declared a jihad on jargon, and now we have a jihad on committees within the arts sector, but without actually giving much reason as to why that is. Perhaps these committees mention too frequently in their papers or their work or even their interactions with the minister the words heads up, or perhaps the word process entered into their thinking too often. Or perhaps in one too many meetings with the council they used the term outcome. You may not be aware of this, but these are all words which the Minister's office has put into writing and declared that the Ministry of Arts, Culture and Heritage, indeed no other official, that the Minister deals with is to use any of those terms with the Minister. He has an absolute hatred of the words heads up, process, outcome and stakeholder. I don't know what he prefers them to be called. Step change, definitely out. No step change. And the worst yet, the biggest sin of all when dealing with Minister Finlayson is to mention the word community. Community is absolutely at the top of his list of things that shall not be mentioned. Now, you can see perhaps then we start to see the rationale for why, for instance, the Minister has decided to get rid of the more substantive representation that exists within the Arts Council for the Pacific Island, Māori and ethnic communities. Because he's taken a lead from what his self-declared idol, which is Margaret Thatcher, and I'm not saying this in a derogatory way. The Minister has proudly stepped forward and said that Margaret Thatcher is his idol. She's framed and on his wall, as I recall. I believe I saw a Twitter picture of it as a lovely golden gilt frame in his office. And of course we know Margaret's view on community. Perhaps this is where he has taken a leaf from her book and banned the use of the word. So Mr Finlayson concludes his requirements to his officials by stating that he has, quote, always preferred the understatement. He's always preferred the understatement, which I'm sure was at the centre of his thinking when he declared recently that we are in the golden age of the arts. That, of course, was not an understatement, according to Minister Finlayson. No, we're absolutely, according to him, in the golden age, even though, as my colleague has pointed out, we've seen a decline in our publishing sector. Ask representatives of our authors in New Zealand, they will tell us that despite, of course, the fantastic works by people like Eleanor Catton, we cannot yet let that paper over what are otherwise a sentiment within that sector of the arts that we really have had a decline, and that we need the government to focus its attentions on how to bolster those parts of the sector who are experiencing such a rapid change around them in the digital age. And add to that the film, TV and screen industry. Now, sure, at the 11th hour, this government finally conceded that they had got it wrong when it came to working with those industries, that actually we had seen significant job loss. At the 11th hour, actually it was even beyond the 11th hour, Mr Speaker, because by the time the government finally listened to those stakeholders and members of the screen industry community, it was already too late for groups like DigiPost, one of the companies that Minister Finlayson heralded as being part of the golden age of the arts, a post-production group that was involved in creating the Everest documentary, which he was so proud to claim was an indication of how good things were in the screen industry. As he declared that company was shutting up shop openly. They had told the government that what was happening to their industry. The same almost day as the Minister declared that he was finally changing his tune on the way they dealt with the industry and the incentives regime, October Animation was closing its doors. Now, Mr Speaker, some may claim that there was ignorance on behalf of the government as to how bad things had got within that part of our arts sector and industry. But Stephen Joyce knows that he sat at the table of October Animation almost 6 months before they closed their doors when they told him that they were on the brink. But if the incentive regime changed, they would have had some of the biggest production companies in New Zealand giving work to October Animation. DreamWorks wanted to come to New Zealand. And Minister Joyce shakes his head as I say that. But he knows that he had that piece of information. He ignored it, and jobs were lost as a result. It was too late. It was too late. You can go and visit the empty offices if you'd like. It was too late for that company. They have every plan of trying to rebuild that business, but jobs were lost. October Animation, I'm sorry to tell you, has had to close up shop till it finds its work. I have not got the wrong company. The member might like to go and speak to the directors of October Animation about that particular issue. Mr. Speaker, the point is we don't have a clear vision from the Minister as to what he's trying to do. Those involved, the communities involved with the Arts Council, have suffered as a result of the Minister's decision that he doesn't want the words community to be involved anymore, and communities will suffer as a result.
I call